Presenting Secrets of Jonson's Ode from the First Folio, Part 1. As usual, we start off by looking at the title page to give us some sort of context. Here is Jonson's most famous poem from the First Folio. Here is the man himself. Rather than reading out the poem in its entirety, for that would take too long, we're just going to dive right into all of the puzzles that we find. And we're going to start off with page 1. Right off the bat, from the very beginning, we can see that there's 17 words in the title. At the bottom of the screen, I will present a 17 tally, counting out how many times we can get the number 17 from simple puzzles. Before we begin that, I'll start with one ligature. As you can see, the W in William is actually two V's, closely spaced together. There are three other double V's in the front matter, which leads me to suspect that we are to see that as a double V. To start off, we will begin on line 1 with a simple gematria sum. 19. We'll keep that number in mind because it's going to be important a little later on. Next, we add up all of the gematria sums for the uppercase letters in line 2. That's the T, A, V, T, H, O, R. They add up to 98. Of course, 9 plus 8 is 17, meaning that this is a digit sum number. Jonson wanted us to associate the author with the number 17. Meaning that we have to associate William Shakespeare, the name, also with the number. If we add up the larger uppercase letter values from line 3, the M, the W, and the S, they add up to 70. If we add up all of the smaller uppercase letters together, we get 155. And as per our rule to subtract smaller sums from larger sums, we do the same here. 155 minus 70 is 85. 85 is 17 times 5. But if we add up the numbers 155 plus 70, we get 225. We're going to use this number in a few seconds. The N and the D in line 4 with and, their values add up to 17. There are also 19 smaller uppercase letters in lines 3 and 4 that are the same size. And if we add 19 plus 98 plus 225 plus 17, we get 359. 3 plus 5 plus 9 is another digit sum number where they add up to 17. Now, if we count the lowercase letters in the title, we say that there are 39. 359 plus 39 is 398. 3 plus 9 plus 8 is 20, and in Gematria, 20 is the letter V. Now we look at the uppercase V, the double V ligature from William, and the letter M. We can use these as Roman numerals, not specifically M as in 1000, but we separate the elements of it to make the following. 1 plus 5 plus 1 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. It equals 22. And if the secret fraternity, which Shakespeare was a leader of, did go by the name of Twice 11 Brethren, this is another allusion to that fact. However, we also have the homonym for the number 2, and we subtract things that are different from a sum. So that means we take 2 from this sum to get 20. Once again, 20 equals the letter V in Gematria. Remember 19, the value of the uppercase T that begins the title. Well, there are 21 letters following that. We add the 2 together to get in this title alone, we have Gematria sums plus puzzle sums that feature the numbers 17 and 40 for a 17 tally of 5. Now I will introduce you to the 17 word couplets on page 1. Very first couplet, the very first lines have 17 words. To draw no envy, Shakespeare, on thy name, am I thus ample to thy book and fame. But that's not all. Jonson has done something very clever here. If you count the number of spaces and letters from the decorative letter T at the beginning to the uppercase S in Shakespeare. You find that there are 17 characters and spaces. Couplet 2. Confess thy writings to be such as neither man nor muse can praise too much, is another 17-word couplet. Several lines down, we have another one. Some infamous bawd or whore should praise a matron. What could hurt her more? Below that, we have the final 17-word couplet on the page. Or, if I thought my judgment were of years, I should commit thee surely with thy peers. This is an important couplet, but that's the subject of another video. Now we look at the 17th line. It begins with, I therefore will begin. Alexander Woe was one of the first people to notice that this is exactly where Jonson wants us to start the real poem. In fact, he's telling us, I will begin this poem, giving us a 17 tally of 11. But what Jonson and others might not realize is there are 17 words from the beginning of line 17 to Shakespeare. For page 1. Now we go on to page 2. But before that, we're going to have to do some counting from page 1. Shakespeare, the second time Shakespeare appears in the poem, the name begins a list of poets. We count down to the last poet, him of Cordova dead, and he is the 13th poet. Shakespeare, my gentle Shakespeare, on page 2, is the 17th poet in the list. There are 17 lines from the top of page 2 to the line which has Shakespeare on it. Between the gentle Shakespeare and the final time Shakespeare's name appears, there are 17 uppercase letters. However, the word and in uppercase is in bracket. That means it's optional. So if we remove that and don't count it, Shakespeare becomes the 17th uppercase word. In fact, we know we are to count uppercase letters because 2 lines up from and himself with it, which is in brackets, we have in brackets such as thine are, in which the first word such does not begin with an uppercase letter. Here we have a pattern, and it's very clever. And in fact, I believe these are instructions to the reader to begin counting things in the first folio, and particularly the front matter. We start off with 17 characters on line 1. Line 17 has 17 words before Shakespeare. And then we have 17 lines. So the pattern is quite simple. We start off with characters and spaces, which is the smallest unit of measurement we can use. Then we go to the next biggest unit, words. Then we go to the next biggest than that, lines. But if we count the couplets from the couplet beginning on line 19 to the couplet that's just before the one that has gentle Shakespeare, you'll find that there are 17 couplets. Once again, we see an example of trias omnia, characters, words, lines, but then they add couplets to it. And finally, we have 17 uppercase letters between the Shakespeares on page 2 rather. Now we go on to 17 word couplets on page 2. Page 2 actually begins with a 17 word couplet. All that insolent Greece or haughty Rome sent forth, or since did from their ashes come. Couplets down, we have nature herself was proud of his designs, and joyed to wear the dressing of his lines. Directly below that, which were so richly spun and woven so fit, as since she will vouchsafe no other wit. And such wert thou. Look how the Father's face lives in his issue. Even so the race. In each of which he seems to shake a lance, as brandished at the eyes of ignorance. Sweet swan of Avon, what a sight it were to see thee in our waters yet appear. Make those flights upon the banks of Thames that so did take Eliza and our James. Shine forth, thou star of poets, and with rage or influence chide or cheer the drooping stage. In total, there are 12 couplets that have 17 words in them. Now we're going to look at several of these from page 2. We're going to look at couplet 33. And as per Christian numerological iconography, 33 is one of the most sacred numbers in the Christian system, because 33 is the year which Christ allegedly died. And so we begin. This line is, and such wert thou, look how the Father's face lives in his issue, even so the race. So, when I first read this, I saw the Father's face as a metaphor for the writer. lives in his issue tells us what the life of the writer is doing and where it is. His issue are obviously the plays, and by extension, his poems. Jonson is telling us the writer's life can be found in the plays. Couplet 35. In each of which he seems to shake a lance, as brandished at the eyes of ignorance. He's talking about the lines of verse. This is one of the most famous couplets, because shake a lance is obviously an allusion to Shakespeare. But I consider shake a lance to be a gesture of defiance, brandished at the eyes of ignorance, therefore becomes held up as evidence of the truth. What Jonson is telling us is that the gesture of defiance, hidden in the lines of the First Folio, are there to be held up as evidence of the truth of the playwright's life. Couplet 36. Sweet Swan of Avon. This is one of two allusions in the First Folio's front matter that allegedly talks about the River Avon in Warwickshire. But Alexander Woe, in one of his videos, says that that's not so, thanks to this man, William Camden. He was the Queen's official historian and what they called a remembrancer. Cover page to his Britannia, which chronicles the lives of the English kings and queens. Avon is mentioned on page 366. In relation to Hampton Court. The Latin verse in the middle of this box, is written by John Leland, an early Tudor poet who is associated with the court of King Henry VIII. Rather than give you poor Latin, I'm going to give you the 1610 Philemon Holland translation. A stately place for rare and glorious show there is, which Thames with wandering stream doth douse, times past, by name of Avon men it knew. Here Henry VIII of that name built an house, so sumptuous, as that on such an one, seek through the world, the bright sun never shone. It begins with there is a stately place for rare and glorious show, meaning entertainments, concerts, plays, interludes, masks, tumbling, possibly even the sad and horrific bear baiting. Times passed by a name of Avon men it knew. He's telling us that in earlier times, this place was known as Avon. and it is beside the river Thames. Now I'm going to present a momentary diversion. This is the title page to the second English translation of Britannia, as it was done by this man. Edmund Gibson. Note that he says he made additions and improvements. Well, let's see what he did to this page. Ironically, the page in which this passage occurs is one page past that where it occurs in the Latin translation. The Latin translation is 366. This one is on page 367. I think it's just a coincidence. But here is how Gibson translated it. A place which nature's choicest gifts adorn, where Thames' kind streams and gentle currents turn, the name of Hampton hath for ages borne. Here such a palace shows great Henry's care, as soul ne'er views from his exalted sphere in all his tedious stage. Well, the question we ask is, where is Avon? How can Gibson get Hampton out of Avon? At least Philemon Holland got it right. So who is more honest here? Philemon Holland, who translated it under William Camden's supervision, or Edmund Gibson almost 100 years later? Here is the front gate of Hampton Court. And this is an early engraving of the place Dictus of Eona, also called Avon. It's Henry VIII's Great Hall. It looks today. And even today you can witness and experience plays and entertainments as Henry VIII would have experienced it. Jonson studied under William Camden, who died in 1623. Is this a mere coincidence? I'm not sure. In fact, I don't think it is. Here is epigram 14 from Jonson's 1616 folio. To William Camden. Camden, most reverend head, to whom I owe all that I am in arts, all that I know. How nothing's that, to whom my country owes the great renown and name wherewith she goes. Than thee the age sees not that thing more grave, more high, more holy, that thee more would crave. What name, what skill, what faith hast thou in things? What sight in searching the most antique springs? What weight and what authority in thy speech? Man scarce can make that doubt, but thou canst teach. Pardon free truth, and let thy modesty, which conquers all, be once overcome by thee. Many of thine this better could than I, but for their powers accept my piety. Jonson absolutely admired Camden, and this is evidence that he was thinking of Camden's Britannia when he wrote Sweet Swan of Avon. But I believe he was thinking of something else as well. He was thinking of the 1606 Act to Restrain the Abuses of Players, passed by King James Parliament. Here's the Act itself. For the preventing and avoiding of the great abuse of the holy name of God in stage plays, interludes, May games, shows, and such like, be it enacted by our sovereign Lord, the King's Majesty, and by the Lords spiritual and temporal, that the Commons in this present Parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same, that if any time or times after the end of this present session of Parliament any person or persons do or shall in any stage play, interlude, show, May game, or pageant, jestingly or profanely speak or use the holy name of God, or of Christ Jesus, or of the Holy Ghost, or of the Trinity, which are not to be spoken but with fear and reverence, shall forfeit for every such offence by him or them committed £10, the one moiety thereof to the King's Majesty, his heirs and successors, the other moiety thereof to him or them that will sue for the same in any court of record at Westminster, wherein no assign, protection, or wager of law shall be allowed. In other words, there's no exceptions. And be advised that £10 in the 1590s and 1600s was worth £238 today. So multiply 238 by 10 and you get to see how much money King James and the person or persons who reported the abuse got. When I first read Sweet Swan of Avon, I thought immediately that it was an oath because of the exclamation point. Now, Ben Jonson had already run afoul of the Queen Elizabeth in 1597, along with Thomas Nash, both of whom were imprisoned over the infamous Isle of Dogs scandal. All copies of the play were confiscated and burned by order of the church and the government. So we'll never know exactly what that play was about. What I think Jonson really wanted to do was write the following. Dear God in heaven, what a sight it were to see thee in our waters yet appear. Here's something that's really ironic. If we take a gematria sum of all the uppercase letters in this couplet, the D, G, H, and T, the sum is 38. And then we count all of the words totally in lowercase letters, and we get now we add them to get 51, which is a multiple of 17. What I chose is coincidentally part of a gematria sum puzzle, or is it? In any event, King James or his censors would have looked at this and said, "Oh, blasphemous oaths," to which Jonson had to reply, "At your command, sire. If I must, I must." Thereby we have Sweet Swan of Avon. But that also means that throughout the First Folio, oaths such as the following, God, can be zapped by the censors to become something less offensive, such as Yar. Holy Mother of God, for example, could also be zapped by the censors. To change into Dear Mother. Now, skeptics will wonder that if I am just making this up. However, there is evidence and proof that this is exactly what happened to plays in the First Folio. And because Jonson had already run afoul of Queen Elizabeth for doing similar things in the Isle of Dogs scandal, I'm sure he instructed his co-editors to do the same thing with plays. And here's proof. This is Appendix 2 from Shakespeare's Merry Wives of Windsor, the 1602 quarto, facsimile edited by W. W. Gregg and published in 1910 by Oxford at the Clarendon Press. The appendix is a comparative table of the main oaths and asseverations occurring in the quarto and folio texts of the Merry Wives of Windsor and in the quarto, and the folio. He explains it. Where an oath has been omitted in either text, the word omitted is printed in the corresponding column. Where either column is blank, the text to which it refers either omits the passage in question altogether, or else gives it in a form too divergent for textual comparison. And here is an example. Line 285 in the quarto has O Jeshu Adavella. In the quarto it is changed simply O Diable. Why they changed it to French, I don't know. And again, O God, in the name of God, O Lord, and God save me, in the quarto was eliminated in the First Folio. Counting out how many oaths Gregg found that were changed between the quarto and the folio, we find that there are 62 oaths which were completely removed. That is a strong indicator that Jonson changed what he originally intended to be in that line to Sweet Swan of Avon, which at once becomes ambiguous, but for insiders, they will know that Avon is not a river, but a great hall. Sweet Swan of Avon? More likely, Sweet Swan of Hampton Court. But what are we to make of our waters? I believe our refers to Jonson's publication of his own 1616 folio, the very first time that any playwright had produced a compilation of his works in folio format. Usually the folio size was reserved for serious subjects like theology, history, military matters. But here was Jonson bucking the trend and saying, hey, I'm going to present my plays and try and raise their status to that of great literature and translations. What of waters? I believe waters refers to the folio size itself, as demonstrated by the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia, published in 1598. A travel book of exploration, published a few years later. Finally, we have the Countess of Montgomery's Urania. I believe waters is a metaphor for the folio size, in which the paper becomes a vessel for the works. That means our waters could refer to the folio size and the fact that Jonson had paved the way in 1616 with his own folio edition of the plays. Now we'll look at this star of poets. Shine forth, thou star of poets, and with rage or influence chide or cheer the drooping stage. First, we're going to do a gematria sum. S in shine is 18. Star is 18. The P is 15. Together, we get 51. 3 times 3. We also know that the line or the couplet has 17 words. But if we count from the beginning of that couplet, the 34th word becomes volumes. I believe that we are to associate the uppercase V as a hint that the person who is the star of poets is associated with the number 17, and that his secret identity as the star of poets is to be indicated by a doubling of his number. And here's more evidence of that fact. If we count the number of letters and spaces from the uppercase S in shine to the uppercase S in star, we see that there are 17 characters and spaces before star. Once again, Jonson is telling us to associate 17 with the poet because he is the star of poets. Now we get a little momentary diversion again. If we add the gematria values of the lines from Of Shakespeare's Mind to Avon, that is all of the italic gematria values, we get a number. It's hidden somewhere on the slide, but I'll show it to you later. Now we present a hidden acrostic. While I was reading the poem and going through it bit by bit and understanding how Jonson was using numbers to associate the name with the number 17, I asked myself whether or not we could find more evidence of that in the poem. I found it on page 1. What I was looking for were things along the far left margin of the page so that we could see it easily. We ignore the 2 in uppercase at the first line because that's not quite what I was looking for. So I found homophones rather, and Roman numerals for 1. Four we have on this line. We have the Roman numeral for 1. Another Roman numeral directly by 4 again. Roman numeral 1. Homophone for 4. Homophone for 2. Once again, if we add up all of these, as we do in a numbergram, as I call them, we find the total is our 17 tally is now at 29. 29 times we can get the number 17 out of this poem by simple counts and gematria sums. We're not using anything fancy or sophisticated. We're just counting and looking at numbers. So let's sum up the number 17, shall we? Not going to go over all of them, just a handful of them. First, the title has 17 words. It's the first clue that the number is important in the poem. The underlined uppercase letters in line 2 have a gematria sum of 98, and 9 plus 8 is 17. The second example is that there are 17 spaces before the name on line 1. Line 17 begins the poem. 17 words are before Shakespeare on page 1, that is outside of brackets. There's also a word acrostic that adds to 17 on the same page. On page 2, there are 17 lines before the line that has the name. Shakespeare is the 17th poet in the list. 17 words with uppercase letters between Shakespeare's on page 2, or if we eliminate "and" from it, we have Shakespeare is the 17th name again. We also have 17 couplets between the Shakespeare on page 1 and the first time it appears on page 2. We have 17 spaces and letters before star, and 12 couplets have 17 words. None of these things can be disputed. None of these things at all. The question is, how many times does the number 17 have to appear in puzzles and clues before it becomes meaningful? Once is a coincidence. Or no, pardon me, once is by chance. Twice is coincidence. 3 times or more, we're well on the way to seeing that there's some design here and some pattern. When we get to number 29, we see that this is intentional. Don't miss part 2. Thanks for watching. See you.